Hi, thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to get started in just a few seconds. We're going to let people come in and get started for our parent panel. We're happy that you're joining us today. Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is LSA's 2024 parent panel, the first of its kind, but today we're going to be talking about navigating housing and transitioning to housing for IDD loved ones and their families. We're excited that you're able to join us, and thank you again for joining us. I want to have a lively discussion for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So get in, get settled, and we can't wait to hear from each of you. So give us a moment, and we'll get started. All right. All right. Welcome to Navigating Housing. It's a parent webinar series. This is part of a 3-part series that we've been hosting all this week. This is the second webinar. If you missed our first one on Monday, go to our website, lsahomes.org, and check out the first one. It was a really lively discussion, and we talked about forever homes. This particular discussion we're going to be talking about today is particularly about the transitioning journey. And we have a panel of parents here. My name is Hadia. I'm going to be your host and moderating this panel, and we're excited to have you. Before we get started, I do want to give an opportunity to find out a little bit more from you. How did you find us? If you don't mind, take a couple seconds and fill out this survey or poll that I'm putting out right now. I just want to know, how'd you hear about this particular webinar? How'd you hear about us? And also, if you are interested in learning about options for your loved one, or if you're just browsing for information, please take the time to fill out this poll and let us know. We want to hear more from you and how we can better service these webinars in the future. And I'm just going to give a couple more seconds here. Almost got everybody. All right. Thanks so much again for that. I'm going to go ahead and close down the poll. During this panel discussion, we're gonna be interacting with a few different types of people and their journeys, parents and their journeys. And at the end, you're going to get an opportunity to ask questions. During the panel discussion, if there's something that pops up and you want to ask it, or you want to leave it for the Q&A, go ahead and put it in the Q&A feature. That's this guy down here at the bottom. And then if there's something else that comes up, it's not really related to the talk, feel free to put it in the chat. My team is working closely with me to make sure that everyone gets heard, and that we get you information that's needed and help you, assist you through this webinar. When we finish the panel, about 30 minutes into this webinar, we're going to open it up for audience questions for you. They're going to be answered live on air. So I'm really excited to be hosting this panel discussion again. And without further ado, I think we can get started. I do want to say everyone is muted who is not on our panel screen. So thank you so much for putting any comments or questions in the chat. All right. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today. And most importantly, we have a lively discussion that we're looking forward to from you. So thank you again for being here. And before I introduce everyone, I do want to say thank you to SV at Home for helping us partner with this particular presentation for Affordable Housing Month. First, I'd like to introduce Dana Hooper. He's LSA's executive director and has a son with IDD who lives in the community and who lives in supported living within the community. Thank you, Dana, for being here with us today. And I'd also like to introduce Lee Nelson, the board member, our LSA board member, and a parent of a son with IDD. He's 24 and lives at home with his parents. And then also Fran, a parent and member of Coastal Havens Families in Santa Cruz. And Fran is also a former LSA board member. Thank you so much, Fran, for joining us. And then Dave and Tracy Hovda. Tracy and Dave have a son with IDD who is 29 and lives at home with them. Thank you, Tracy and Dave, for joining us. And we'll go ahead and get started with our panel view. I just want to make sure that I can make you visible for everybody. There we go. All right. One of the first questions that I think is kind of a pressing question, and I wanted to start with today, is the right time to transition for your loved one into housing. So many people believe that they're going to I don't know. I think find a forever home, and we talked a little bit about that on Monday with our first panel. But I want to know now from you all as parents, when do you think the right time is? And I think, again, some are in transition and some have found that place. But when did you perceive the right time was to start transitioning your loved one into housing? And we can start with Lee for this question. I just want to hear from you, and then we'll kind of go down the line of panelists. Lee?
Thank you. My wife and I started talking about our son and his long-term, home a long time ago. I think the right time to start discussing it is early on, partially because the right time to actually transition into and I think that means emotionally ready, but also ready in terms of just some of the basics, at least for our Luke. We think about things like, how are his socialization skills? Can you hear me with the audio?
Yeah, it's breaking up a little bit, but we're catching almost every word.
Oh, I don't understand. Okay. That's Murphy's Law of webinars. But also teaching him how to deal with the unknown. And, Luke's sister has been away at university for several years now. So he's just got us, and we try to make sure he's got the right boundaries and that he understands boundaries. So we feel we take these things, socialization skills, can he deal with the unknown? Does he understand boundaries? Just to make sure that he's ready, so that we want the right time to be when we think he'll be successful at it. We don't want it to be not successful. And this is something that we talk a lot about.
That's a really great point.
So that's sort of our discussion plan, often over a glass of wine when Luke's sleeping, trying to plan out exactly when we think's the right time. But I have to tell you that on the parent side of this too, we have to feel like we're ready to let him go live somewhere else. I mean, for 24 years, he's been our baby, for lack of a better word. And the idea that he would go and live somewhere else and not be with us, that I don't get to dry him off after his bath every single night, just seems odd and maybe a little lonely. But I think we're ready, and we're just trying to make sure he gets ready.
Yeah, I see you, Dave, shaking your head, nodding your head and saying, yeah. Tracy and Dave, has that been your experience getting ready, that you as parents have to be ready?
Right. I mean, as far as what Lee's saying, is somebody else going to know that when Scotty gets out of the shower, this is kind of how we do it? We've got kind of I don't know, a procedure that we do. It's not procedure in a negative way, but okay, first we do this, then we do this, then you scrub this, then you get out, then okay, let's clean your ears first. We shave Scotty, he doesn't shave himself. So is somebody else going to be able to figure these things out, or do we have somebody stand there with us when Scotty's in the shower and see how we're doing it? Or other people have ideas, I'm sure all the folks from LSA who are really, you know, they've been spending time with kids like ours for a very long time. And they probably have other ways that they're doing things. So just because David and I do it a certain way doesn't mean, you know, it's been 29 years of us doing things our way, but it doesn't mean that somebody else is not going to have an even better way. And that would be fun to see somebody else come in and go, oh, well, we have a fine time when we're doing this. I don't know what your problem is and why you've been having all these troubles all this time. But our Scotty's 29, and so we've been working on things for 29 years. And so I think Scotty is gonna take a little longer to be ready than we are, even though we've just said that because, you know, he is our little boy and all that stuff. But he he's
Speaking of which,
he's sticking his head in the door. He was banging on the door before, so we thought
He's a
we
part of this
would
conversation
just
too.
leave the door unlocked.
Yeah.
And he can participate if he wants. But
Yes.
I think it'll take, once we know, when we know, if we know that there's going to be a place for Scotty for housing, then we'll do a lot of talking. We'll do a lot of, and I'm here to learn myself from, you know, we don't know what's going on either. We're here to learn from the other panelists as well, because they've done this for longer. But we will be talking to Scotty a lot more. We'll be showing Scotty pictures, I guess, of a new house a lot more. We'll be driving by a lot. We'll be making a whole bunch of little visits. I'm assuming that this is how you transition a child like ours who's 29, but really a 3-year-old in his head. I assume that's how you do it. But we have luckily people here who are more experienced than we are, who can give us that advice too.
I think in our case, you know, Scotty's got his certain challenges, but we love having Scooter live here. And I think kind of like Lee, here he is. And so we really love having Scotty here. But I think as we've gotten a little bit older, I think our focus has turned more to what's in his best interest, as opposed to, you know, what we like to do on a day-to-day basis. And I think, you know, we've started exploring more because we think it's very much in Scotty's best interest to find a great long-term, you know, lifetime home.
That's right. Fran, and I see that you've made that transition. So can you validate some of these things that we're hearing Lee and Dave and Tracy say?
I certainly can. Yeah, I think to the original question of when is the right time, is there a right time? We were talking about this earlier, actually. Dana had the perfect answer, in my opinion, which is there is no right time. It's when it's right for your individual, your loved one, and you as a family. And I say you as a family because for us, if we hadn't have been ready, it would have even been harder to transition Scotty. Like you have to kind of lead the process with them, right? And so I had this fixed idea in my head that when my younger son was going to go off to college and then, you know, graduate college, early 20s, that would be the time that I set that goal for Scotty, right? Early 20s. And it was just a date. I mean, it wasn't like I knew something. I just had to pick something. That was for us, right? So that Mark and I could kind of like plan around what came after. So we just picked a date, but we weren't fixed on it. It was somewhere in the early 20s. Because that was a goal to move towards. And then I started sort of sending Scotty more and more to like away camp, with the idea that he was kind of getting used to spending the night in a different community setting and away from home, and there'd be somebody else doing those like intimate care things like Tracy and David and Lee too, right? We're talking about the things that we do. as caretakers. And I don't think there was ever a right time for me. Like, I miss him. He is, sorry guys. He's doing amazingly well. Like, and to the point you made earlier about that becoming an independent person gives him the opportunity to do things he wouldn't do if he was with me. That is actually happening. So yay, you know. He went on a boat trip last week. He went on the Monterey Bay with a group of people. I wasn't there. And we didn't even know if we needed to give him seasickness tablets because he's never been on a boat. And he did amazingly well. And I can tell he's really proud of himself. And he's doing more and more of those kind of things. So I know it's been the right decision for him. And it's the right decision for us as a family, but I don't think that emotional part where you thinking you still miss him, and I still both of us still feel this like tug, you know, is he okay today, right? What's happening? You know, and we've got Dana on the panel and we've got me, and I, you know, Scotty has only been transitioning in the last sort of 3 years. Dana did this a long time ago, right? So you kind of got the benefit of the just happened. So I don't know if that feeling goes away, Dana. Yeah. That like slight panic. But I know it gets easier the more he does, that I can see, and how he's growing and he's happy. Yeah. The less of those panicky anxiety feelings I'm getting. So I kind of want to encourage people to work through it and keep moving, even though it's kind of scary, because even just now it's starting to get easier. Tell me it gets easier, Dana.
Yeah, that would be my next question, my follow-up. Fran, you took the words right out of my mouth. Dana, you've seen so much as both as a parent, and also just as someone who's watched, I don't know, countless numbers of families make this same transition now. Can you talk to us a little bit about when the right time was for you, but then also these parents and the process that they follow? What would be the process? Fran, you spoke a little bit about it. You started giving him more outings. But Dana, we want to hear a little bit more about that time period. Okay, I got the right time, and then now here's the process. What does that look like?
Sure. I mean, for me, as Fran pointed out, it was a long time ago. So Brent has been living in his home in the community for 25 years now. And I guess I grew up in a family where, you know, we graduated from high school and he went off to college and then you never came back, right? And so Brent grew up and graduated from special ed, or as I used to say, timed out when he turned 21. And it just seemed logical to explore what would be next for him. And fortunately, I mean, the system's gotten a lot better since then, but fortunately for him, he had a special ed teacher, Holly Wade, who was to the parents of students in her class, hey, it's time to start thinking this through. Hey, there's options. Hey, what can I do to help you along in that process? And so I had no idea it was the right time. It just seemed like a logical time to start. And so I just started looking at options, and you know, it's sort of ironic given that I'm executive director of a group home organization. But the first thing I did is look at a couple of group homes and I went, oh my God, this is not the right place for Brent. Then I thought, what else? And so I just started looking at options, and I was so fortunate to kind of stumble across that combination of his mom, my mom, wanted to help her grandkids go to college, and in the case of her grandson who couldn't go to college, to find a house. So she helped us find a house, and Holly Wade got us talking to a supported living agency, and it just kind of came all together. So we didn't know when the right time to transition was, but thank God we started when we did. And I guess the final part of that, and we'll get into it, each of the four of us will get into it a little bit. You do have to think out a transition plan. And for some, it might be pretty simple. For others, it might be a little bit more complex, but it's got to be based on your needs as parents and your loved ones' needs. And in my case, Brent moved into his new house, was coming home every weekend for the weekend. And a couple weeks later, he comes home. We have our favorite pizza routine since he was, can remember. And he has his favorite pizza. And after pizza, he says, home. I go, what do you mean, Brent? He goes, home. And it was very clear he wanted to go back to his house, which was his home, and he was happy to visit for dinner. So I knew right then that he'd made the transition. And it was nothing that I actually can think of that I did or didn't do that enabled that. But yeah, so I'll pass the baton back to you, Adia.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really important, that I'm hearing you say, kind of echoed. There is no such thing as the right time. But then I'm also hearing that the process for everyone is different. Why don't you talk to us a little bit more about the process that you see, Dana, with other families? Because I know a lot of us are in the midst of the process right now. Dave and Tracy and Lee, you and your wife are also in the process. Can you
Sure.
talk a little bit about that, Dana?
Yeah, I mean, I see, variations of the process, but it involves getting started early and starting to learn about what the options are, with an eye towards, of course, what would seem to be fit for us, for my son, for my daughter. And and that's not the same, right? It is to be very loved one centric. And I also see that process taking some time because the parents have to really get comfortable and start to let go, because it does involve some letting go. And I see some parents are let go easier than others. I won't go further on that subject, but I can take specific questions about what letting go looks like. But I think it all kind of comes back to, having the confidence and the comfort that someone else can do just as good a job as you. And in fact, might even, allow your loved one to learn more independence, or, look at different things, and certainly be more socially involved than he or she could have been at home. So, but you have to explore. And so what does that exploring look like? Well, SARC's a great resource, your service coordinator. There's a lot of resources out there, organizations like, Housing Choices, or Parents Helping Parents, or providers like LSA that's, quite happy to tell you about what a residential care looks like, or, a supported living vendor that might be able to tell you a lot about supported living. So finding those resources, getting on people's mailing lists, getting out and seeing stuff. And ultimately, you're going down a journey that says, I need to understand all the options. I need to kind of find one that's right, for my son or daughter. And I need to ultimately figure out when and how to pull the trigger. And that's that transition plan, kind of understanding what that might look like. From an LSA standpoint, slow and steady, right? And individualized.
Yes.
And if that means starting with Dave said it, looking at pictures, you know, visiting what might be his future home, to have dinner, meet people, see what his rooms look like. All those kinds of things could enable that both parents and the individual to be in a transition
Yeah.
without necessarily prescribing, exact dates and exact activities, because I think they all need to be, the plan needs to be built by those involved. It's not a specific plan. So I think the process starts early, involves using a lot of resources, and over time kind of narrows down, where you want the ship to land, and ideally happens in a time frame that allows that to happen normally and naturally. Probably the worst case scenario, and I see it once in a while, is dad's gone, mom's now 83, son living at home is 64, and all of a sudden got to find a place for son who's 64 because mom's needs to go into assisted living. Well, that's back up against the wall, and so I think sooner's better than later, and that's kind of a worst case example.
And you've done this, you said, for the last 20-25 years. I know Brandon's about 40-45 ish, somewhere around that, in his 40s.
Yeah, I had him when I was 10.
And so Fran, Lee, I can't remember. I think Scotty's, is he 24?
No, Scotty is 27.
He's 27. Okay, so Lee, you have the youngest one here.
I
Can
do.
you talk a little bit to that, as far as how parents can facilitate that smooth transition while letting go of their child and fostering independence? What are you and Akiko doing right now to make sure that there's a smooth transition?
Well, we are in the information collection stage that Dana
Okay.
touched on.
Yeah.
We're talking to everybody we can, attending events, asking a lot of questions. Even Fran on our webinar here was nice enough to show us where Scotty lives and even
Oh, wow.
bought us lunch. And I learned a lot about that wonderful farm that he lives on and his life and there, which it looks wonderful, by the way, Fran, as you know. And so through friends and a network, we learn a lot. Now, my son is somewhere on the autistic spectrum, so we go to the annual event that the San Francisco Autism Society holds at Stanford University, because there are literally hundreds of people there and
Yes.
a lot of providers as well, including the LSA. And it's an opportunity to, rub shoulders with people that have the exact same concerns that we do. And out of that, I usually come home with a list of websites or numbers to call or newsletters to sign up for. My Gmail is packed with those sorts of things, and I read them to try to pull out the nuggets of information that seem relevant for somebody young like Luke, who just aged out of the school program 2 years ago. Because we feel like he's probably getting to that age where he will grow more independent without us than with us.
Mhm.
So we are really at the information collection stage, try to see the options. We visited some places. We talked to our, of course, our service provider at SARC, who's has some information. She's really great at getting things done, but maybe not a creative thinker when it comes to the possibilities out there. But you know, we're trying to learn from everybody we can. And if I wasn't a panelist on this panel, I probably would have signed up for it, just like all of you out there, just to learn what I can.
And speaking of, Jill Escher is actually in the audience right now. Hi, Jill. Thanks so much for mentioning that, for that plug, because it is a great resource. We go to that conference
Wonderful.
every year. Yeah. And we try to make sure that we have a presence there in a way that's meaningful for just that reason. Fran, I know that we get a free lunch with you if we come and check out where Scotty lives. But what about you, Dave and Tracy? Talk to us a little bit about how you're trying to foster and take these steps towards his independence so that there's a smooth transition when that time comes.
Well, that's a great question. We've been fortunate to know Fran for many years. She's a real dynamo, and we've learned a lot from Fran. So we kind of have benefited from all the work that Fran's done, and we were chatting with Lee as well. And I think that, you know, we learn a lot from each other. And so I'd say we're taking baby steps as far as trying to prepare Scotty. What we're I think kind of realizing is that when you're ready, you're a little bit behind the 8 ball, because it's a process and it takes a while. And so if I could talk to myself 10 years ago, I think I would have been a little bit more proactive, learning more. We were really focused on Scotty's Day program and Morgan Autism Center and so forth. And we really weren't
his behavior and
right. And so just focusing on more to the day-to-day and maybe not quite fully appreciating the amount of research it takes on the part of parents and the amount of time it takes to probably find the right opportunity. So I'd say Tracy and I are doing a lot more work trying to look into options, and then we'll, I guess, secondarily try and help Scooter get more prepared for that transition once we feel that it's more real and kind of nearer term.
You guys touched on something, and I know that we're just about at the halfway mark, and I promised we were going to open up for a Q&A session. So that being said, if you're in the audience and you want to ask your questions, go down to that Q&A session and start getting ready for that. But before we do, if I could just, before we start the Q&A session, I want to just address one thing, because I think it's important. You said there was a lot going on during his school years, and you had enough to think about the day-to-day. And I know that's the case for many, many parents, that you couldn't even dream about thinking about the future at that moment. But Fran, can you speak to how you started that on top of your many, many other hats that you were wearing in order to get your son ready for that transition? How did you weigh? I mean, and again, every situation is different, but it's a lot. And I as I hear from many other people who are on this panel, you have other neurotypical children who have needs. They may not be in special ed, they may be in other class. What did you do? How did you manage that?
Thanks, that's a really good question. And actually, as I heard the question, the original question too, I thought, well, Dave talked about thinking back and thinking if you could go back and talk to yourself, 10 years ago. I think I would be kinder to your point. I think when you're in the midst of the teenage years, and if you have any other children involved or aging parents, my experience was we kind of divided the family into, I was staying at home and I wasn't working. So my job was Scotty and caregiving at home and planning for his future and, helping raise his brother. So Mark was working all the time and he didn't have time, right? And I think a lot of parents are in this position. and couples, maybe single parents, right, where you're kind of doing a little bit of everything. And so give yourself some grace. Do everything that everyone has said. That's great to go to the autism conference. Even if your child isn't on the spectrum, that's a really great resource. And parents helping parents. My main resource then, with knowledge, because I was telling Mark what was happening, he wasn't, you know, in play, if you like, were other parents, a little bit ahead of me, right, or right alongside me. And so I did kind of buddy up, and it's weird, we didn't plan this, but having Tracy on the panel, because I remember looking at day programs, and the same process I went through to find a day program kind of applied the same thing to housing. And even prior to that, you know, looking for the right school setting for Scotty. He is quote, nonverbal. He doesn't use speech to communicate. And so I kind of could narrow at that point anyway, I narrowed his opportunities for housing. I thought, well, he's going to be in a community care home, like an LSA setting. But how independent can you really become? He needs 24/7 care team as it is, but he's in supported living, which is the most independent I think Scotty can reach with his restrictions and his challenges. And so that helped me focus on just two types of housing, right? And I recognize that there are people out there with every kind of kit, right? And so I just looked at Scotty and thought, what is the most independent I can do? And then friends, you know, I got invited to last minute to a group of families who I knew some of them, but I didn't know others, but I had a friend who was going, and one of these moms was Lisa Zugel, and some people out there might know Lisa, but she kind of led this small group, and we plastered the walls of this room at the YMCA with post-it notes about what our hopes and dreams for our kid. And that was a great start. We kind of just took the brakes off and just what's important, birthday parties, you know, still being able to go to his music class, going on camping trips. Everybody just put everything that they wanted out on the walls. And then we kind of figured out from that what direction to go in. And the intent of that meeting was actually for those parents maybe to come together and start doing something together, right? And what came out of that exercise was about 4 different ideas, all of which went to some part into fruition. And one of those is Coastal Haven Families, because Heidi Carden was there. And so that exercise of meeting with other families, getting your support, you know, getting support from each other, buddying up. If you're going to look at, you know, housing and make visits, go with another parent if you know another parent. Sometimes that's hard during a working week, but sometimes you can go on the weekends. And so I kind of did all of that, but I really appreciated some standout parents that helped introduce me to other parents and ideas.
And Fran, thank you so much. I do want to transition now, and I'm going to open up the first question for Dana, actually, because I know he didn't get a chance to really address this particular question, but that was extremely helpful, Fran. Thank you so much. And it sounds like you've been helpful behind the scenes in a lot of different people's lives. Much more Fran for president. Much more underrated than we've cared to mention, or some of us have even known. So the Q&A is blowing up, and I do want to make sure that we get to some of these pressing questions. But before I do that, I do want to say some of these questions will be addressed on the final webinar for this week. That's on Friday. It is in a different link, but if you go to lsahomes.org and find get involved, underneath parent panel for 2024, you should be able to find Fridays. Register for that. There'll be lots of great content just like this, and we'll deep dive into some of these other things. But one of the things I want to address is someone's already brought to our attention, which was completely unintentional, that we only have parents on this panel that have males and not females. And I know that that is the case. However, Dana is coming from a position of opening several all female homes for LSA. And I'd like to have him kind of speak to some of the issues that a female might face versus someone who has a son and is trying to transitioning into the home right now. And I want to be very specific to say, I think kind of summing up a lot of the questions that have already been asked, what are some of the fears that are different for you perceive for parents transitioning their daughters into a home, and how has that been for the parents you've seen transition their daughter into an LSA home? How do their fears become alleviated, so to speak? And I know Monday we addressed it, talking about financial and talking about, you know, some of the safety issues and things like that.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, well, I know a lot of parents who have a female daughter, and we have 3 homes where they're all female, as well as a number of co-ed homes and some homes that are, you know, medical and you know, by virtue of being medical, are co-ed. And, you know, the number one fear always is, you know, how is my daughter, loved one, you know, going to be safe? How are you going to keep her safe and, you know, and healthy, and, you know, have her have a good life and grow and all these other things? But it starts out with how are you going to keep her safe? And it kind of comes back to, we have to keep everybody safe. And so that's kind of the way, you know, we've built our program. You know, some of it's the, you know, the licensing regulations that are specifically directed in an adult residential facility. And, you know, it has to do with protocols for hiring people, protocols for training, you know, how do you, you know, provide oversight, and who oversees us. But that's sort of built in. And I often say, you know, by the way, if your daughter lives in an apartment with supported living, a lot of that stuff is not built in, right? And it's one-on-one. And if I was a parent, I worry most about one-on-one, right? Because there's nobody else around. And in an LSA home, typically, there's a multiple of 2 people around, and they're both trained to be aware and be mandated reporters. If they see or fear something, they have to step forward and say it, and it'll be looked into. So it's a valid fear, and obviously, whatever option you look at, you got to kick the tires. You got to kick them hard. You got to make sure it's a quality organization, that you look at their track record, be there and see, you know, what a day in the life would look like. You know, do the residents have smiles? Does the staff have smile? I mean, you know, do they seem to enjoy being there? So yeah, you have that fear, but make sure you kick the tires, and there's really a lot of quality providers out there.
And Dana, thank you so much for answering that. It's a valid concern. It has to deal with transitioning. And so I wanted to make sure it's not something, again, that we did intentionally. But when we were asking around, these are the people who volunteered. That being said, everyone that you see on this particular webinar is a part of LSA's leadership in some capacity, or has been. And they were willing to open up whether they were in process, whether they had placed their loved ones, they were willing to open up. And I will say this, out of the panelists that you see here, none of their children are living in an LSA home as of right now. None of them are living in an LSA home, but they're vouching towards not just LSA, but also their journey. That's from the boardroom to the youngest person who's working, or the most junior person who's working at LSA. That's been my experience, and that's been the experience of many people. There's a spirit of transparency, and there's a spirit of community and wanting to get it right for everyone's family and everyone's household, whether it's your child or not. That being said, I do want to address a couple of questions that have come up just about LSA before we move on to the other parents, Dana, because I think you're in the best position to answer, but if anybody wants to chime in, they can. They want to know about options for all and whether or not this would overlap, if you can do options for all and LSA at the same time, and that if they need to cancel their services and start with LSA, how do they do that?
So I'm somewhat familiar with Options for All, but essentially that's a day program. And LSA's homes are what's called a residential program, and it is expected that individuals go out during the day, just like us real adults, go to a job, go to some recreation, go to a day program. And so I'm guessing that, that someone who lived in an LSA home and wanted to be part of Options for All, that would be their day program. And we don't want to dictate what their day program is. It should be what's best for them. And in some homes, we have in-home day programs because there aren't good options outside. And but in general, people go off to their day program, and in the morning, and at the end of the day, they come home, and home is LSA. We do have a day program. We call it the Community Nutrition Training Program. It's not limited to LSA residents. That's where my son goes to as a day program. That's the only crossover. 25 years later, I thought to myself, darn, Brent could have a better day, if he looked at, the LSA program. And so he started looking at it one day a week, and then 2 days, 3 days. I think he's at 4 now. Everybody said, no, he'll never tolerate a day program. He's too cantankerous like his dad. And, of course, everybody was wrong. He loves it. He loves the social aspect. And, but, Options for All or any other day program, that's fine. In supported living, the nights and days kind of all blend in. And it can look like 1-to-1, 24/7. And that doesn't necessarily give someone the life that they need or want.
I think that's a great segue here. I know that there's several people who've been participating in other day programs and have lived in an LSA home. And particularly there was someone at some point that was in Options for All and also living in an LSA home. And then we ended up working with that person while we were at their home because they were in Options for All filming program. So it was quite cool, kind of clash of everything. That being said, I do want to transition here and talk, no pun intended, and talk about this one particular question that came in from an anonymous person. It says, if a child has no decision-making capability about their living arrangement, how do parents deal with transition and post-transition? How would parents ensure their loved one is taken care of long-term and maybe great placement to begin with? But to your point yesterday, and I'm assuming this means Monday, nothing lasts forever. And this person says, I need ideas. anyone can answer this. I'd like to open up the floor for other people if they do have answers. Dave, Fran, Lee, of course, Dana, but anybody can answer this. Just jump in there.
Well, if all goes well, LSA will last forever. And I think there are housing options where they inevitably have a end date, you know, where there's a couple and they have people in their home and then they want to retire, they get infirm, and then the people living there have to move someplace else. And I think, you know, LSA and maybe similar kinds of organizations that have a really long-term focus that are ongoing entities will provide lifetime care as opposed to for the next 15 years, and then you have to find another place. Ideally, that's the goal.
Fran?
Yeah, supported living too. Supported living, you know, in the sense that you can stay in a home of your choice and it's separate from your care team. So if the care team starts to get, let's say, wobbly, you can switch out the organization of care and your loved one can still live in the house or the apartment where they are. And importantly, with whoever they're living with, because you know, Scotty's in supported living, for example, but the setup that we have is he's not actually living by himself. So he's living with another person, and that person may or may not have disabilities. In his case, he does. I would say when you're looking, it's really hard. I really feel for you when you ask that question about, you know, you're making this decision for your kid and they're not helpful in a way that you would hope that they would have an opinion, right? But you can go, when you go visit places, first off, how easy is it to actually get inside and talk to people, talk to residents and staff? Now, the caveat to that is it might be a great organization, but they are really respectful of their residents' privacy and the staff have to do a job. And so it's not like, you know, if they don't, you know, let you in whenever you want to just drop by, but you should be looking for an organization that's willing to open its doors and show you around and ask questions and start to form a relationship with that organization prior to making the decision to apply for your kid to move in. So get to know them, because that organization, that home, is going to become your kid's family. If it reflects the values that you and your family have, will they respect the things that you think your child does now? I mean, it's a starting point. You know, you don't, I mean, I'm not like I was when I was 18, but there's two things I know. I'm not like I was when I was 18 on a good day. And I don't want to live with my mom. I love her. She's coming to visit. Great. So those are the two things. It's like, do you think your kid is, you know, give them that opportunity to adult, if you want to say. Adulting's the whole new thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm still learning. We're all still learning. And so nothing's set in stone. Make your best guess. Kick the tires, like Dana said. And if you're not still clear in your own head, because it's an emotional decision and it's really hard, okay? Talk to friends, talk to family, talk to whoever, you know, you get that feeling of support from. A therapist, you know, maybe you don't have a therapist and you get a therapist, you know, find any form of support that helps you make that decision, because it isn't easy and it can feel really lonely. And even after you've done it, that during the transition, it can also feel, all those feelings don't just disappear the day you make the decision. They're just replaced with new worries, right? But usually your gut can tell you stuff, you know. Yeah. I think that's it. And I think you talk to the people in the organization and you feel good after you've talked to them. Chances are your kid's going to feel good. Leadership counts. It really counts. And to Dave's point, long-term planning, nonprofits are great for that, right? Because like LSA, I know from being on the board up till recently that there's a strategic plan that goes out and beyond, and succession planning for the organization. is important. Asking the question, like, what's going to happen with, you know, if you retire, what's your plan?
You're so right.
Ask the organizations those questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fran. I know we only have a couple more minutes here, but this question is specifically to those who have a child living at home. And this person says, Alice Peterson, she says, I'm curious how you're able to take trips, etc., without your child. I know we get a respite help, but how about for overnights, perhaps for a week or two? Unfortunately, she has another meeting, but she's going to come back later and read these answers. So this question was for Alice Peterson. She wants to know how you do it. Lee, do you want to answer that question? Dave, Tracy? Lee, go ahead first.
I will, that's a good question, because all of us need a break, even overnight. The only, we used to live in England, actually, and there was a woman that would that our son would stay with her family, and that was wonderful. When we came back to California, we realized we weren't going to find that situation, but we were able to have Luke attend a week-long camp at Via West, which is in Santa Clara. And it's now been taken over by or purchased by Ability Path. And they have a website. If you're not familiar with it, there are camps that you can sign your child up for anywhere from 4 to 6 days, I think, this summer. And so will help pay for that. And that gave her amount of time. It's not 2 weeks, as Alice asked, but it can be for as long as 4 to 5 nights. And that's better than nothing. And away, because we don't have a relative that we can leave Luke with, or that we believe is capable of managing Luke, up to our standard anyway. But Via West has been our only opportunity to get away for a period of time.
Yeah, and
Can I just jump in? I wanted to make sure that we were answering her question. Is she asking about respite services, or is she asking about a transition?
she's asking about respite services. It sounds like
Oh,
she
okay.
wants to know specifically from those who are living at home. I know that we are just about at time. And it's still several questions that are in the Q&A. I did put the link that Lee just referred to because I happen to know Lee and Akiko's a little bit, a microcosm of their journey, and they have told me that before. So I asked them specifically for that answer, for that reason. But that being said, there's already people who've asked for Fran to take them and them out to lunch. Fran, you're gonna have a long. I'm just kidding. But it's.
Can I go too?
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Same. But that being said, I do want to bring up the last few slides because I want to make sure that people have a way to get those questions asked to someone to talk to, someone to reach out to. Fran talked a lot about creating your community or reaching out to your community. What if you don't have a community? We can be your community, and that is why we're doing these webinars. We can't serve and house everyone, and LSA is not right for everyone, but we like to continue to foster these conversations and also facilitate in some way a conversation to get you started on whatever your journey looks like. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to go over and just remind you that we are going to be having another webinar on Friday. We will be having more questions and panel discussions there. We're hoping that you'll join us. It's May 10th, 3 to 4. We know the Mother's Day weekend is coming up. Happy Mother's Day to all of you who have children. And thank you so much again for joining us today. Please make sure to sign up for that on lsahomes.org. And then finally, meet us in person. We're going to be having a celebration at Campbell Community Center on the 18th. There's a QR code, and it's also on our website to sign up and get tickets. And if you go to the next slide, I think you'll be able to continue the conversation with us. We answer those emails. That info@lsahomes.org goes directly to me. and I dispersed to the appropriate person, but we'd love to hear more about your situation. And that is the best way for us to connect you to any of our panelists, should that be something that you both choose to embark on in a conversation. We also want you to continue the conversation with us online. Was this webinar helpful today? Did you learn anything new? Was it in any way reassuring or validating? We want to hear about it. So please do join us. And as always, join us on lsahomes.org. I also want to thank each one of our panelists for joining us. Dana, Dave and Tracy, Fran and Lee, thank you so much. I wish we had more time because it sounds like a lot of the things that you shared really were striking a chord with so many people, and we didn't even get a chance to answer the 6 or so questions that were left. We did about half. I do want to say thank you to SV at Home. They partnered with us for this webinar series that we're doing this week for Affordable Housing Month. Please do take the time to take a look at their socials and connect with them as they have many other great events going on around the South Bay this month and around Silicon Valley in general. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you too to our attendees. As I mentioned, this webinar, as well as the transcript for the webinar will be available after this recording, and we're hoping to see you again on Friday. Join us again then. That's it for now. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Bye-bye. Take care.